Okay, thanks very much for the invitation. It's great to be here, and I think it's really good to mix science and art up. I'm a great art lover, and it's nice to see art being applied to the skin, and I hope we can think of some things to do more of that, actually. So this is actually, I just found this on the internet last night. This is a new art project that people can sign into on the internet, and it's, I can't remember the name, I've forgotten the name of the artist already, you can easily find it. Where basically, I think it's either poetry or a piece of prose, and the idea is that everybody who signs up has one word from this tattooed on their wrist in this case. So it's a bit of art, skin art that I didn't know about. So I work here in this building in what's called the Center for Dermatology and Genetic Medicine. So we're really interested in skin diseases and finding particularly genes and proteins that are disrupted to cause skin diseases, and then ultimately to try and build on that knowledge to fix the problem, and hopefully in the future, with some of the great drug discovery facilities we have in this new building here, to try and develop new treatments for untreatable diseases. That's essentially what we try to do. So DGM, as it's called, Center for Dermatology and Genetic Medicine, is a joint venture between this College of Life Sciences and the College of Medicine, Dentistry and Nursing at Nine Wells Hospital. And many of us, including myself, have joint appointments between the two campuses. And we've core funding from the Wellcome Trust of 6 million, which has allowed us to create what we think is one of the strongest centres for skin disease research here in Dundee. And if you include the clinical staff at Nine Wells and students, we have between 60 and 70 people working on skin disease here. And our main research themes are identifying genes that cause skin disease in the population. Mainly, initially, very rare diseases, and I'll show you some of those. But that's led us over the years by a circuitous route into the genetics of a very common skin disease, in fact the most common skin disease, eczema. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. We're very active in trying to deliver something called gene silencing therapy. So in some skin disorders you want to get rid of a gene, an abnormal gene, and we have a means of doing that, but the problem we have is getting that material into the skin. So that's a focus of our research. And if we can crack that, it'll be very important for a lot of diseases. So there's a lot of effort. And then drug discovery here with the fantastic resources we have in Dundee to go from a skin disease through various laboratory techniques to hopefully a new medicine eventually. And we also, particularly the groups at the hospital, are very interested in skin cancer and the causes and treatment of skin cancer. So DGEM, what we've tried to do here is really bring together people from different disciplines to focus on the problems of skin disease. And a lot of the discoveries that I've made over the last 25 years or so that I've been in the field have really, so I'm a biologist, so I work very closely with clinical dermatologists, and a lot of our major discoveries have come about through a close dialogue between clinicians and scientists. So we're coming at the problem of skin disease from these two complementary angles, and without doubt most of our major discoveries have come through that dialogue. And now, in this era, when we're thinking about translating that knowledge into new treatments, that's another order of magnitude more difficult. And so we recognize that we need to involve people who are medicinal chemists who make drugs. We need to involve people in physics who use lasers and ultrasound and these kind of fancy Star Trek type devices to help us get things into the skin for therapy. And we need information technology, bioinformatics, so really high-powered computing science that we have here. So bringing these five areas together is what DGEM is all about, and that's how we built it here in Dundee, and the Wellcome Trust funded it. So a little bit about skin. So I love skin. I quite like this picture. So Google Images is great for finding things for talks. The skin has many functions, and they're probably not all summarized on this, but I'll just work our way around. And Tabitha's mentioned some of them already. So these are bacteria and viruses. So your skin is a barrier, so really like your threshold concept, because it's exactly what we work on is skin barrier function. So skin is the first line of defense between you and the external environment, and it's designed to keep bacteria and viruses and fungi and other materials out of the skin. That's a very important function when it's functioning normally. This is pollen under the electron microscope. So another thing that it does, the skin does, is to stop allergens from the environment getting into the body. And if your skin barrier function is not intact, then all sorts of things can get in. Pollen and various other allergenic materials can get in. The skin is designed to be tough, actually, and I'll mention that. So the strength of the skin, so it's on the outside. It's when you hit something or tap something, there's incredible stress imparted on the cells of your skin, and those cells are designed or specialized to withstand incredible mechanical stress, and that's particularly important in your hands and feet, which have to support the weight of your body. Skin is designed to stop water loss, so you have a huge surface area, and it's through that huge surface area water evaporates. And so skin barrier function is as well as keeping stuff out, is to keep water in. So your skin gets dry and flaky if you have a defect in that. This is a little Scottish theme. So if you grab a thistle, you'll feel pain, and so your skin has nerves. There's a close, so it's how we sense the outside world. And there's a close connection between the skin and the nervous system, and as Tabitha mentioned, blushing response is again to do with a connection between psychology, your nervous system, and a change in the blood flow in the skin, and that's all to do with the connection between the skin and the nervous system. This is something, we're in the Dundee, the sunniest city in Scotland. So the skin is designed to protect you from UV damage, and another thing which the skin does is use UV light to produce vitamin D. So the chemical synthesis of production of vitamin D is dependent on sunlight hitting your skin. And the skin controls your temperature through sweating and evaporation and so on. So it's lots of, and there are other functions as well. And I look particularly like this line from this movie Ronin. Somebody accuses Robert De Niro of, you're just thinking of your own skin, and he says, well, I like my skin, it covers my body. And I like it as well, for the same reason. So skin arguably is the largest continuous organ in the body. And I say continuous because I recently said it was the largest organ in front of an audience that had someone who worked on bones, and he said, oh no, bones are much bigger. But yeah, they're discontinuous, 200 of them, there's only one skin. So anyway, it's the largest organ in whatever way you want to look at it. It has many different layers. The outermost layer is the epidermis, which I'm particularly interested in, and then below that. So the epidermis is really an impermeable layer. The outermost parts of it are an impermeable layer. And then below that, so kind of like plastic or cling film in a way. Below that is the dermis, which is a more rubbery kind of material, and then below that we have fat again. And then there are many kind of miniature organs within the skin. So the hair follicle is one of those, and it's surprisingly complicated for something which doesn't seem that important to bald people like me. You can live without it. There are blood vessels in the dermis and in the fatty layers of the skin. And we also have two types of important glands. We have sebaceous glands, which are always hooked onto the side of a hair follicle, and they're an oil gland, so they secrete oil, which helps lubricate the hair shaft, and that comes out onto the skin and helps moisturize and protect the skin. And then sweat glands, we have different types of sweat glands in different parts of the body, but they secrete sweat, and the evaporation that helps control temperature. I like this Christmas cake analogy of the skin because the bit I work on is the icing on the cake, the epidermis. So this is a slice, a thin slice, if you imagine a slice of bacon. However, this is a thin slice through the skin, stained in a way that just shows up some of the structure inside and looked at through the microscope. So this is 100 microns, so this is a tenth of a millimeter. So it's the epidermis itself is less than a millimeter thick, and the dermis is only a couple of millimeters. So most of what you pinch when you pinch your skin is really the fatty layer actually underneath. So the epidermis is made of cells, and those cells are designed to be very strong to protect you from mechanical damage. This kind of basket weave structure at the top is called the stratum corneum, which in the last few months I've noticed that creeping into adverts for moisturizer. It improves your stratum corneum. So suddenly they've taken that term, but that's the official term for the skin barrier layer. And I'll talk about that in a minute. This whole epidermis is constantly being produced and shed. So the cells here in the bottom layer of the epidermis are proliferating, and their daughter cells migrate up, and are eventually turned into these dead, flattened, plastic-like cells, and they're eventually shed continuously from the surface. And most house dust is actually shed skin, believe it or not. And this happens every 4 weeks. So from here to being shed happens in about 4 weeks on most of your body. It's slower in the hands and feet where the skin's thicker. So that's the epidermis. So if we take these cells from I'm going to talk now really about the toughness aspects of the skin. So if you take these cells from the epidermis and grow them in a petri dish and what we call cell culture, and here's 4 or 5 cells, and the blue stuff is DNA, just to show you the individual cells. And these cells have been stained with a special dye that only identifies one protein within the thousands that are in the cell. And this particular protein is one of the keratin proteins in green here. And it forms a skeleton basically inside the cell. So cells, human cells are like basically a balloon full of water. So they look like a very weak structure. And if you imagine standing on a balloon, it'll burst. But if you stand on a balloon, it has a stainless steel cage inside it, and that cage will take your weight and you can stand in the balloon without bursting it. And that's basically what gives human cells their strength, is this internal skeleton, which is called the cytoskeleton, the skeleton inside the cell. So some people in the population, fortunately not very many of them, a few thousand in the UK, a few hundred in Scotland, have a mutation in one of the genes that produces this protein that forms the skeleton. And when you have a mutation, instead of, and this is cells from one of these patients, they don't have that nice stainless steel cage. They have a horrible, gunky mess. And those cells are then fragile. And what happens when those cells are fragile? So in a normal person, these cells are all containing this cage, and they're very strong. In one of these people who unfortunately has this genetic mutation, some of the cells in the skin, depending which gene is involved, are weakened, and what you see here is a blister occurring through the epidermis because of fragility. So this person's skin, where this image has come from, has just been rubbed with the back of a pencil and then sampled, and just that rubbing with a pencil has caused formation of a blister, so their skin is very fragile. So in a person, this is a disease called EBS, epidermolysis bullosa simplex. And these people have skin blistering all the time. The more severe forms have blisters pretty much everywhere. There are milder forms where they have blisters on their hands and feet, and you can imagine it's a pretty unpleasant, painful experience. So we discovered in Dundee the genes that cause this disease, I guess 20 years ago now. And then over the last 20 years, learning from that first experience, we started to look at all sorts of other related genes, and as I could give you a whole talk on that, but there's just a few examples of other skin disorders in this group called disorders of keratinization. So these skin blistering, skin thickening, particularly on the feet and the pressure points, these are extremely painful lesions. Your nails and hair are made from special keratins, and so some of these people have nail defects, they have sebaceous gland defects. Your internal organs have a type of skin called epithelium, and that can be abnormal in some of these people. And this is the surface of the eye, the cornea. Even you can have fragility of that in some of these conditions. So that tells, and that, from those studies, we learned an awful lot about how the skin works and how these cells work, and that's really the basis of therapy development now. So we lessons from nature, and we hope to eventually take that back to the clinic. So the second area I'm going to talk about is really to do with keeping stuff out of the skin, allergens and bugs, keeping your skin hydrated, and to a lesser extent UV light protection. So this comes from our studies on skin barrier function. So this is again a slice through the skin, and this time the skin has been stained. This brown stain shows up a protein called filaggrin, which we've worked on extensively here in Dundee. And it's, I'll tell you what it does in a minute, but basically skin barrier function, as I've said, has two functions. It's to keep stuff out, pathogens like bacteria, allergens, irritants, chemicals, for example, out of your body, and it also keeps water in. And so if you don't have an intact skin barrier, you lose water and stuff gets in that shouldn't do. And this protein called filaggrin, it's this dark stain is profilaggrin, and it's made as a molecule that looks like a string of sausages, which is inert. So these granules in the skin here contain this inert substance. And then just at the junction of where those living cells become these dead cells and this plastic kind of material, profilaggrin is cleaved up into the individual sausages, filaggrin. And that step is essential for forming the barrier. And then once the barrier is formed, the sausages are broken down into another material called natural moisturizing factor. So your skin makes its own moisturizer if it's functioning normally. And that stuff is a bit of a misnomer because it also is involved in water retention. So moisturizer is really trying to put moisture into the skin. This stuff actually is holding the skin's natural moisture in and stopping it from escaping. So, and that's called a humectant actually, rather than a moisturizer. It changes the pH or the acidity of the skin. It protects from UV in a subtle kind of way, and we think it may have antimicrobial effects. So what we discovered at the end of 2005, beginning of 2006, was very much to our surprise that 10% of the population have a mutation in this gene that knocks the gene out. So normal people have a ton of this protein, this brown stained protein in the skin. About 10% of the population, so there's about 10 people in the room, one of us probably has it, has one copy. You have two copies of the gene normally. And 10% of the population, one of those copies is knocked out, and you only make 50% of the normal amount of this protein. And then about 1% or so of the population has both copies of the gene knocked out, and you don't make the protein at all. And that's turned out that lack of that protein or deficiency for that protein in the skin leads to a defect in the skin barrier function. And what we showed was that this is the main driving force behind eczema, as you see here, a range of allergies, food allergy, peanut allergy, dairy products, egg allergy, allergies to animals, pets, a form of asthma called atopic asthma, allergic asthma, and hay fever. And these conditions were all considered to be defects of the immune system, and they do involve the immune system. But where the immune system comes into play is because your skin barrier is defective, and these things come in from the outside, and your immune system sees material that it should never see. And so it turned out the skin, actually a defect in the skin underlies these. So it turned the whole allergy and asthma and eczema field on its head, actually. So it's a big discovery for Dundee. So that's the functions of the skin again, and what we're trying to do now largely in the lab as well as finding new causes for diseases to try and treat them, and we're in a good position here in Dundee to do that. These are the people who give us the millions of pounds that we need to do that. These are the people who do it, not just me. And thank you very much for your attention.